Hey guys, welcome to this updated CrewAI tutorial where you're going to learn how to use CrewAI's brand new features to build an AI newsletter from scratch. And what I think you're going to love about this tutorial is that we're going to build a crew which searches the internet to find the latest AI articles to condense everything into one great looking newsletter that looks just like this. And what's super cool about the newsletter you're going to be building is that it follows the same format and style that a bunch of famous Twitter accounts have used to generate followings of hundreds of thousands of users. So all around, if you're looking to learn more about CrewAI and its latest features and to see how this technology works in the real world, this is the video for you. And before we get started, I just want to mention that you can grab all the source code for this video completely for free. All you have to do is just hit that link down in the description below. And if you want to see more content just like this in the future, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button. But enough of that, let's go ahead and dive into the 4 major updates of CrewAI and then get on to building out our CrewAI newsletter. So the reason I'm making this video for you guys today is because the creator of CrewAI just posted on X that he released a new version of CrewAI that's more reliable and comes with a lot more features for us to use. And the main features that we're going to be focusing on in this update is the fact that we can now make things hierarchical. We can also start using asynchronous tasks. We can start working with expected outputs and callbacks. Now, I know these might not make sense now, so let's go ahead diving into each one of these new features, covering what it is and how it works. So the first major update for CrewAI is that it now supports hierarchical processes. And basically, in simple terms, that means our crews now have a chain of command where we have a manager agent who coordinates the rest of the crew and delegates tasks to each one of the agents and validates the outcomes that each one of the agents produces. And from what I've seen in my own experience, this new hierarchical process produces much better results and much more consistent results than the previous process, which was sequential. And in the sequential workflow, basically tasks in the crew were executed one after another in a very linear fashion. And like I said, sometimes things just got lost in context and just the order didn't make sense. So like I said, this new approach and process works much better and produces much better results. And the great part is that it's super easy to implement. All you need to do in your code to make this change is you need to update your crew to update the process to now say that things are hierarchical instead of saying that they're sequential. And the other thing is you need to set up a manager LLM. And this manager LLM is basically going to be, the brains behind orchestrating all of the different agents in your crew. So like I said, just set up manager LLM and just, you can use OpenAI or what other LLM you'd like to use. So enough of this new process. Let's go ahead and move on to our new feature, which is going to be asynchronous task. So the next major update for CrewAI is that it allows us to use asynchronous task execution. And the best way I like to describe this update is pretending that you and I are writing an AI research paper. So in the old way, what we would do is hire a research student to go off and research the history of AI. A few minutes would pass, they'd give us some updates and we go, great. Now go research the ethics of AI. Great. Okay, well now find us some of the thought leaders of AI. And each one of those tasks takes a few minutes to operate. So all in all, maybe 10 minutes for everything. Well, what we could do now with asynchronous task execution is that we could go ahead and find our 5 research tasks that we want to execute in parallel. So, go find the great thinkers, go find the history, the ethics, the new tools, and we could run all those jobs in parallel where each job, might take 2 minutes. And because they're running in parallel, the whole job will now take 2 minutes instead of 10 minutes. So this really speeds up the way we're able to run our crews and gets us results much faster. And it's also super easy to use this new asynchronous feature. All you have to do on your task is to say, if you want to use it asynchronously, is you just set async execution to be true. And what's cool is let's pretend that you want to then, aggregate all of your asynchronous tasks and look at their outputs. Well, all you need to do on another task is say, I need to set context of these 5 asynchronous tasks that I just triggered off. And this will make a lot more example once we start building out our code example later on, but I just want to let you know that this is the basics of working with our new asynchronous task. So let's go ahead and move on to our next feature, which is going to be expected outputs. So like I just mentioned, the next major update for CrewAI is that it allows us to add in expected outputs for our task. Now this is a super simple feature, but it really improves the quality and reliability of our task. So let me just give you a concrete example real fast. Let's pretend we had a list ideas task. Well, what we could do is say, hey, my expected output for this task would be 5 bullet points with 5 ideas for an article. That way there's no confusion on what this task needs to output. And what I've also found really helpful is to go ahead and give an example output in the expected output. This really makes sure that there's no confusion on what the task needs to be producing. And you'll see a lot later when we're building out our AI newsletter, we're going to be making a lot of use of this new expected output feature. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the fourth and final new feature, which is going to be callbacks. And the final feature that we're going to be focusing on are callbacks. And callbacks are super simple. Just think of them as functions that get called whenever one of our tasks finished running. So let me give you a concrete example. Let's pretend that we had an idea generation task that generated 5 ideas about AI. Well, what we could do is set up a callback to either print out the results of our newly founded ideas, or we could maybe set up a callback to send out emails to people to share those newly generated ideas. Or in our case, what we're going to be doing later is we're actually going to be saving those newly generated ideas to a CSV file. So you'll see this actually in practice later on in this tutorial. But those are the 4 major features that we're going to be focusing on for this CrewAI task. And if you would like to see more information about working with CrewAI in general, I actually made a complete crash course for beginners. So you can go ahead and click the card in the upper hand corner of the video and you can go watch the entire crash course if you want to understand the basics and fundamentals of CrewAI. But for the rest of this tutorial, we're mostly going to be focusing on these brand new features so that you can see how everything works in action. So let's go ahead and start building out our new CrewAI newsletter from scratch. I'm super excited. Let's go ahead and dive in. All right, guys, so now we're on to the fun stuff where we're going to go ahead and actually start diving into the code. And just to paint a roadmap of what we're about to do next, I'm first going to create a new folder. Then we're going to set up all of our dependencies for our project. And then we're going to dive into the fun stuff where we're going to create our agents, our tasks, and our tools using all the new features we've covered so far. So let's go ahead and dive into the first step where we're going to make our folder. So what we're going to do is just say make dir, and I'm just going to call it CrewAI new feature tutorial. So let's go ahead and make this folder. And then what I'm going to do is head over to Visual Studio Code, and I'm actually going to go open up that project real fast. So let's see. Yep, here's our new folder. Fantastic. So now that we've opened this up, what I'm going to do is go ahead and make the few files and folders that we need to make our lives easier. And the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and make a pyproject.toml file. Now, this might be a little weird if you haven't seen it before, and I'm not going to go into too much detail on this one just because I covered a lot of this in my previous video where I do a complete crash course on CrewAI, but I'm just going to go ahead and paste it so that you guys can actually like see what's happening. And at a high level, what we're trying to do is just go ahead and actually define all of the dependencies that you and I need to run this project. And the most important ones are going to be, obviously, we need to have Python to run our project. Then we're going to use CrewAI. Most importantly, we're going to be using the new version of CrewAI. This is super important that you get version 0.11 or anything greater. And then, we're just going to make sure we get our environment variables and so forth and so forth. So that's the main thing that we're going to be doing. And what we're going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and create our main file. And our main file is obviously we're going to be running all of our code. And I'm just going to go ahead and just stub out some to-dos for us so we know the direction we're going to be taking this app. So the first thing that we're going to be doing is setting up our agents. The next thing that we're going to do is set up our task, and then we're going to be setting up our tools. So this is the order that we're going to be building everything today. And what I'm going to also do, now that we have that set up, is actually go ahead and install our dependencies so that we can actually won't run into any issues as we start building out each one of these. So all we need to do is if we do a control backtick, you can actually open up your terminal. And what you need to do is, like I said, we're going to be using Poetry to actually install our pyproject.toml file, and that's actually set up inside of my ZSH terminal. So I'm just gonna have to switch to that real fast. But what I'll have to do, and you'll see more of this, like I said, in that crash course again, but all I have to do is just type in Poetry install --no root, and that's going to go ahead and install all those dependencies that we just talked about a few seconds ago, and it's going to make our lives very easy going forward. So I've been loving this new way of actually installing and creating new projects and setting up all the dependencies for them. Okay, cool. So now that we got that out of the way, let's go ahead and actually open up our new Poetry file so we can see that everything's working. So we just type in poetry.shell, and this will create our new environment. So you can see it's spawning a new shell, and look at that, it's showing that we're working with our new AI newsletter project. Fantastic. And we can just make sure that it's working. If I just run print hello, fantastic. And then we're just gonna run Python main. Fantastic. All right, yep, everything's working. So let's go ahead and start diving into the first task where we're actually gonna start setting up all of our new agents for CrewAI. And when I go ahead and set up agents, the first thing I like to do is actually go ahead and create a new agents file inside of my file explorer. So that's what I'm gonna do real fast. So I'm just gonna call it agents.py. Now what we wanna do inside of this agents.py is create a class that's going to be able to return all of our different agents. And we'll talk through each one of them real quick. But the important thing to note is that a lot of the new features that we've discussed in the rest of this video actually do not come from working with agents. Most of the new features we've talked about come from the crew itself and also with task. So we're going to speed through this section really fast, and I'm actually just going to go ahead and actually just paste all of the different agents and then walk you through why we're doing what we're doing. So right out of the gate, we need to have 4 different agents to run our program, and what they're going to be are the editor agent, who's kind of directing and overseeing the entire process of creating our newsletter. The important thing that you'll notice with this agent is that I'm actually setting max iterations, and that just allows us to make sure that we don't end up in an endless loop where this runs 200 times just to make a newsletter. We just want to be very quick. So this is one of the new features where they made it a little bit more robust and actually make sure that we get a great output after this many iterations. And the other thing that's important is we're allowing this agent to delegate work to other agents. So that's super important because we want people to be able to, like, hey, I need this type of information, you know, news fetcher, can you please go grab me that? A few other things, we have our news fetcher. This is the agent that's going to go out and search for the top AI news stories. And what you'll notice for this agent that it actually has a tool, and these tools allow it to go out and search the internet. So you'll see how we build this in just a little bit. Outside of that, we have the news analyzer agent who goes out and actually, you know, makes a detailed summary of the articles that they read. And then finally, we have the news compiler agent who takes in all the different content we've read from all the different articles and all the bullet points and detailed markdown summaries into one final cohesive newsletter that we're going to send out to all of our viewers. Okay, cool. So a few things that we need to do on our side. You'll notice I'm getting some squiggly marks under agent. And the reason why we're getting that is because we haven't actually imported that proper library yet. So, you know, from CrewAI, we want to import our agent. And what you'll notice is we're getting a squiggly under CrewAI, which is odd because we've already obviously installed all of our dependencies earlier. And that's because we haven't updated our Visual Studio Code to start using our new Python environment that we created a second ago. So all we need to do is go ahead and open up your terminal. And what we're going to do is you'll notice whenever we spawned a new shell, it told me exactly where it lived. So what I can do is just copy that address right there, click that Python version down at the bottom. And what I can do is you'll see it says enter interpreter path. So I can click that link. I can paste in our new poetry environment that we just created, press enter. And what you'll notice is it now says the exact Python environment that we just created. And you'll notice the squigglies go away because obviously we've installed everything. One other thing you'll notice is that we're getting some issues with our search tools, but hey, we're going to work on building those search tools in the third step of this tutorial. But give yourself a pat on the back. You just set up some awesome agents. And now we're going to move over to go ahead and setting up all of the tasks that need to run inside of our crew. And to create our task, all we need to do, once again, open up our file explorer, and then we're just going to make a task.py file. And this one's going to be very similar, where once again, we're just going to make a class, and this is going to be an AI newsletter, and then we're just going to call it task. So it's going to be a class. Now this one, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to walk you through each of the 3 tasks we're going to make and actually walk you through why we're doing it and talk about how we're implementing the new features. So the first task that we want to do is actually go off and fetch the news task that we're calling earlier so we can go out and grab all the new AI news stories. Now, let me walk you through what's new about this function. So the first thing is we're obviously going to go off and start doing asynchronous execution. And this is super important because this allows us to go off and fetch 5 to 10 different news stories all at the same time. So that's the first one. And the second one is we're going to start using expected stories. Now in the past, what we would have done is just say, hey, go fetch the top news stories in the past 24 hours. And, you know, that's just kind of what would happen. It just would have grabbed it. But what we can do now is say, no, with my expected output, I want my stories that you go grab to include titles, URLs, and a brief summary of each story from the past 24 24 hours, and then I go ahead and almost generate an example array where, we have little JSON objects of like, yep, this is exactly what needs to come back, so that I will be able to go off and, manipulate and read all of the different news that you go back and generate for me. Fantastic. And the next thing that we're going to start doing is going ahead and actually analyzing the news that gets sent to us. Now, this one is a little bit longer, so let me walk you through it. So once again, we have a description of, hey, go grab the news stories and just make sure we have at least 5 formatted articles for our news. Then what we're going to do is, once again, we're going to have asynchronous task. So this will allow us to analyze different news articles at the same time. And what is interesting is that we have context. Now, if you remember from earlier, whenever we start executing a synchronous task, there was also the ability to provide context. And context was basically saying like, hey, whenever the previous task finishes, feed the output of it into this task. So in our case, our analyze news task, where we're going to make sure that we're pulling out all the necessary information from researched articles. So we're basically going to be feeding the output of this task into here, which is going to be the context of this task. So I hope that makes sense, where we're feeding this task into this task. And this is all happening because everything's happening asynchronously. And once again, we're also going to be using expected outputs, where we're going to say like, hey, when you go out and search for news stories and you get a breakdown of what happened, I want your output to look just like this. So as you can see, everything's nice and formatted. We're getting out the exact information, a rundown of what happened, the details, and why it matters. That's exactly what we want our output to look like. And the third task that we're going to be focusing on is going to be the compiling or compilation of the newsletter itself. And for this one, what you're going to notice is not only are we passing in the agent and the context, we're also going to start working with callback functions. And that was one of the major new things that we started talking about earlier. So for this one, what we're going to do, let's go part by part. Once again, we're going to be compiling newsletters using our context. And this one's important because this compilation task is actually going to be receiving the inputs from this previous task. So you can kind of see how we're slowly building up the chain, where we start off researching, then analyze, and then compile everything down into one final newsletter. So that's just kind of the flow of how this crew is operating. And once again, what you can see that's pretty cool with this expected output is that we start off with a description of what we want and provide, once again, a great example of exactly what we want to see in the final output to make sure we get really consistent and reliable results. And in this case, we just want to say, hey, these are the top news stories with the headlines, and then we go on and do a deeper dive into each one of those stories with a rundown, the details, and why it matters for each one of those. And this is the same format that's getting used, like I mentioned earlier, in some of the top performing newsletters that are out there on X right now, where they have hundreds of thousands of readers. So this is going to produce some awesome results for us. But what we're going to go ahead and do next is actually go ahead and clear up some of these squiggly marks. So the first thing is, you'll notice that we're missing task. So what we need to do for task is, this time, instead of importing agents, we need to import a task. So from CrewAI, I want to import a task. Fantastic. And the next squiggly mark that I see is for datetime. So all we have to do to import datetime is just say, hey, from datetime, import datetime. Fantastic. So now this is all cleaned up. So what we're going to do next is we're going to hop over to our Main.py file, and let's go ahead and actually start entering in some of the puzzle pieces that we have just built so far. So the first thing that we want to do is go ahead and add in all of our agents, and we need to import them first. So what we're going to do is we're just going to say agents are equal to, and this is just going to be our AI newsletter agents, and this is what we made earlier. And then we're going to have our task, which are just going to be our AI newsletter task. And now these are obviously squiggly, so we need to go ahead and import those two. So super simple, just from our agents file, import the AI newsletter agents, and then from our task file, import the AI newsletter task. Great, so that's looking good. And the next thing that we're going to start working on now that we have our agents is we're going to go ahead and set them up. So this is going to be super simple. We're just going to pull out our editor agent, and this one's just going to be agents.editor agent, and then our news fetcher is just going to be our news fetcher one, and so forth for the rest of our different agents that we've just talked about. Fantastic. Now what we're going to do is I'm actually going to pull up our task side by side so that you can see why I'm passing in what I'm passing in. Okay, so let's start off with a fetch news task. Now for this one, what we're going to do is say fetch news task. And then for this one, what you'll notice is all we need to pass in is an agent. And in this case, we want the news fetcher to fetch the news. That's pretty straightforward. The next one is going to be our analyze news task. And for this one, we're going to do is just basically, you gotta love Copilot filling in the right information. But what we're going to do for our analyze news task is pass in the agent, who in our case is going to be the news analyzer that we created earlier. And then we want to pass in the context. Well, in our case, what is the context that we want to pass in? And this is where things get a little bit interesting. What we actually need to do is actually break this up and put it in an array. And just because you can pass in multiple items to a context, so that's super important to remember. In our case, the only piece of context that we want to pass in is our fetched news items. And this is basically just going to allow us to, like I said, start slowly building up from researching the internet, analyzing what we've learned, and then building out a final newsletter. Great. So I'm going to keep moving this to the side so that you guys can actually see what we're doing. And the final thing that we're going to do is go off and build our compile newsletter task. And this one's going to be a little bit longer than the rest. So let me go ahead and show you what's happening. So we're going to go and create the task, pull it out from over here. And then what you'll notice in our final version is we need to pass in the agent, the context, and the callback. So those are the three different items we need to pass in as parameters. So in our case, we need to work on our agent, who's going to be the news compiler. Then we need to pass in our context, which is the previous task. Like it's kind of cool that you can see that we're building up. And then finally, we're going to pass in a callback. Now we don't have any yet, so we're going to put a to do to say add callback function. Fantastic. So now that we have that set up, what I'm going to also do is let's just go ahead and skip a step, and we're going to actually go ahead and build our crew real fast so that you can see how everything ties together, and then we'll fill in a few of those final missing puzzle pieces for you guys. So we're going to go ahead and create a crew, and what we want to do with our crew is we want to pass in our agents, and that's just going to be everything we create up here. So that's super straightforward. Then we're going to work on our task. Now our tasks are just going to be these three tasks we created right here. Super simple. And then this is where we're going to start using some of the newer features, and more specifically, this is where we're changing things to go off from sequential over to hierarchical. So all we have to do is just say process is equal to process dot, and then just hierarchical. So hierarchical. Fantastic. And then lastly, if you remember from the earlier training, we have to start defining a manager LLM in order to just start actually using the hierarchical process. So that's what we're going to work on implementing these next. Okay, so we're getting a few squigglies. So let's clean up these squiggle marks and then actually go ahead and get this filling the missing puzzle pieces. So the first thing is we need to go ahead and import our crew, and that's super straightforward. We're just going to say from crew import our crew. Sorry, from CrewAI. That was my bad. Crew, and then we also want to import our process. This is what allows us to change, like I said, between sequential and hierarchical. So that's looking great. And then the next thing is we need to define our manager LLM that we want to actually, run the entire orchestration and set up the chain of command. So in our case, what I'd like to do is actually go ahead and just set up like a general OpenAI GPT-4. So just write it up here. I'm just going to go ahead and initialize one real fast, and we'll just do something like this. So just OpenAI is equal to a chat OpenAI. And once again, more squiggles, so let's go ahead and knock those out real fast. And this one's pretty straightforward. We're just going to use LangChain for this. So we're going to say from LangChain and then OpenAI. I just went to import chat OpenAI. Great, things are looking good. So let's go ahead and actually start using this in our LLM down here. Fantastic. So what you might notice is that so far I've mentioned that we're going to use a hierarchical process to go off and orchestrate and make sure there's a chain of command and that things are getting operated in a top-down fashion inside of our crew. But what's cool is if you were actually to like dig into what is happening under the hood with CrewAI, you'll see whenever we go with a hierarchical process, there's actually a pre-built agent that's a manager that actually looks just like our other agents right here, but it's just, it's just defined to be a manager agent. So that's pretty cool that CrewAI goes ahead and sets up a manager agent for us whenever we start using hierarchical. Okay, fantastic. So now that we have went ahead and actually kind of set up a little bit more of like the final output so that you guys can see what it looks like to actually add in the new hierarchical process, let's go ahead and start actually working on the next task, which is going to be setting up our tools. More specifically, we want to go off and start searching the internet. So let me show you how we're going to do that. So to set up our tools, all we need to do is once again open up our File Explorer, and what we're going to do is just make a new folder, and we're just going to call this Tools, just because in most projects you'll actually have a bunch of different tools, so we want to keep things nice and organized. So the first thing we need to do is just go in here and create a init.py file, just so that Python recognizes that this is a directory, and then we're going to go off and actually add our tool, which we're just going to call search tools.py. Now what I'm going to do in here is I'm actually just going to go ahead and like paste what the final output is because I've already described in the previous crash course on why we've set up everything inside of this search tool. But let me walk you through what's happening at a very high level, and if you want more detail, feel free to go watch the entire free crash course that I set up earlier. So what's super important about this is we have set up a tool that and we know we've set up a tool because we've added the tool decorator to this search internet function. So this is what allows the crew to recognize that it has the ability to actually use this tool. And what it's going to do is we're going to pass in a query, and this query is what we're going to pass into Serper, which is a tool that allows you to go off and search the internet. So what you actually need to do is if you haven't used Serper before, all you need to do is just come over here, serper.dev, and like you said, you can see it's the world's fastest and cheapest Google search API. It literally takes a second and produces a ton of great results. So just sign up if you haven't before. But whenever you do finally sign up, you'll be brought to a dashboard just like this, to where you can see how many free credits you have left. And like I said, it's free to use, so I definitely recommend using it. But what you need to do is come over here, create an API key, and what you can do is just click reset key. And so I'll just go ahead and show you how you guys can do this. You'll click reset key and then copy it. And once you've copied it, what you're going to do is we're going to actually open up our .env file, and this .env file is where we're going to go off and store all of our environment variables. So I'm just going to come in here and paste it, but more specifically, we need to give a name to this new key, and you can actually see it over here in the tools. It's our Serper API key. So we're just going to say Serper API key is equal to that. Fantastic. And now that we've set up our tool with our key, what it's going to do is go off and search the query in the internet. More specifically, it's going to be looking for news articles. What we're going to have happen from here is it's going to actually try and just make sure that there was no errors when it was searching the internet. And then what it's going to do is create a quick string from all the information it got from its top 5 results that it was looking up when it searched the web. So it's going to pass us back a title, a link to the actual article itself, the date, which is super important because we're building an AI newsletter and we only want to make sure we're including stuff that comes from the past 24 hours. So this date field that we get back whenever we use Serper is going to allow us to make sure we're not putting stuff in that was, from 3 months ago. So this is going to make sure we're getting the latest and greatest. And like I said, this is just going to return back a list of internet search results back to the rest of our code. So now that we have this set up, what we can actually do is start importing it in the rest of our code. So if you remember back in our agents file, we had some tools that we said that our agents can go off and use. So all we need to go off and actually start fixing these squigglies is we need to import the search tools that we just created. So all we're going to do is up top, we're just going to say from our tools folder and our search tools file, I want to import the search tools class. Fantastic. And this will actually resolve all of our issues. So fantastic. You've just set up your new tools for your agents to use. So let's hop back to our final main.py to go ahead and actually finish clearing everything up because we're almost done, guys. Y'all have crushed it so far. So the few other things that we need to do to actually go ahead and get this crew to run is we need to go off and actually grab our OpenAI keys and actually update our environment variables so that our OpenAI can actually, go off and do everything it needs to do inside of the crew. So let's go ahead and grab our OpenAI keys real fast. So all we need to do over on OpenAI is go ahead and click that we want to go over to the API. And once we've done that, over here on the left-hand side, we can click API keys. And once we're here, we can go ahead and create some API keys for our project. So I'm just going to go ahead and say this is our CrewAI updated. This is going to create a secret key. So make sure you protect this secret key and don't share it with anybody. So I'm going to copy it and we're going to head back over to our code. And it's important that you name this the proper key. So you just got to call it OpenAI API key because this is what OpenAI is going to search for by default. So now that we have our key pasted in, what we're going to do is finish tying up a few loose ends. So one of the main loose ends that we haven't got to do yet is implementing this callback function. And the reason we're going to create this callback function is because we want to save our newsletter to our local, basically to our computer once it's done created. And it's going to be saved as a Markdown file. So what we're going to do is go ahead and create a new file, and we're going to call it our file.io.py. Now what this is going to do is allow us to save our final, like I said, our final newsletter as a Markdown file. So let's go ahead and save it, and let's start working on this. So like I said, this is going to, we're just going to call it save Markdown. And what we're going to do is we just want to like go ahead and pass in what we want to do, the task output. Now the task output is going to have a results to it, and you'll see that in just a second. But the main thing we want to do, let me just like for speed's sake, just show you what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and get today's date, because that's what we're going to use as the name as the file. So we're going to set the name of the file to be today's date.md, so it's a Markdown. And then we're going to write the output of our task to inside the Markdown file. And the way we can grab the result of the task is just say task output.result, and that's how we can grab the string content of our output. And then we're just going to print that, hey, you know, everything was saved properly. Fantastic. And then once we need to do to go ahead and fix our missing dependencies, we're just going to say from datetime import datetime. Well, this is looking great. Y'all are crushing it. And then what we're going to do whenever we head back over to our main.py, what we can do now is actually update our callback function. And what we're going to do is just say that we want to use our save, basically save Markdown. So I'm just going to say save Markdown, and then now we need to go import it. So just head back up top, and what we're going to do is just say, one second, we're just going to go ahead and say from our file.o file that we just created, import save Markdown. Looks great. And now that's looking fantastic. And the only other things that we need to do before we can run it is let's go ahead and scroll back down. And now that we've created our crew, it's up to us. Just go ahead and kick it off. So what we're going to do is just say, you know, kick off the crew. So this is going to be results is equal to, you know, crew.kickoff. So that's how you kick off the crew. And then we're just going to print out the final results when the crew's done. So we're just going to say crew work results. Fantastic. Copilot's too smart sometimes, and then we're just going to print the results. Okay, fantastic. So let's go ahead, try running this real fast, and then we'll debug if any issues come up. So all we're going to do is go ahead, open up our terminal again, and now we're just going to run python.main.py to go ahead and actually run our new crew. And then this should start kicking off everything and start trying to generate our new AI newsletter that it will later go ahead and actually save. But we actually ran into a quick error, so let's go ahead and fix this real fast. And it says cannot import the name AI newsletter. So I think we actually misnamed something. So let's go ahead and fix that real fast. And I know what we need to do. If you just actually head back over to our agents file, what you'll notice is that it's looking for agents plural. So we're just going to update the spelling of that, save it real fast. Try running it again, and hopefully things will work better this time. And oh, we ran into one more small error. Once again, we misnamed it. So AI newsletter task. So if we head over to our task file, go ahead and copy this. We just misspelled it and put a lowercase l. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead, rerun it again. And I think we're almost there at the very end. Finally, it did not find our OpenAI key. And that's just a very quick issue that we need to resolve. All we need to do is actually just load our environment variables that we have saved over here. So this one's super simple. Just go back to your main.py file, and right up at the top, what we're going to do is actually just go ahead and say, hey, I want to load all the environment variables that I have saved so that we can use them throughout the rest of our project. Okay, great. So let's go ahead, try running it one more time now that we're in the home stretch. And then, all right, our crew is off to the races. So what it's going to do is just go ahead and run for a few minutes, where it's actually going to go ahead and work in the new hierarchical structure, to where it's going to go off and search for some cool new AI articles. It's going to take out, yep, like you see, this is the exact expected output that we got or we're looking for. And this is our tool, our search tool, going off and actually grabbing the title, the link, and then sometimes it can't find the date, but it will try if it can. And then it'll go off and generate snippets. And then, you know, it's just going to keep going from there. So what I'm going to do, and like this is what I was saying earlier, to where it's using that expected format that we set up. So like I said, what we've been talking about actually does work, and it actually does get implemented in our code. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to let this run for a few minutes, and then I'll go ahead and show you the final Markdown file that'll get saved over here with today's date of February 20th in just a little bit. All right, so our crew just got done generating our AI newsletter, and it's honestly pretty awesome. So today is February 20th, 2024, and the results it got were awesome. So literally within the very past few days, Sora just came out, and there's a ton of buzz on the internet right now where people are talking about how this is awesome, what it's gonna replace, and then it's pretty cool that our newsletter follows the exact same format that we set it up earlier in our expected output section. And what's also pretty cool is that this article actually just broke 6 hours ago, where the US is now actually setting up an AI task force to make sure that, they're just basically enforcing regulation. So this is breaking in real time, and our AI newsletter found it and put it in a format that we could now go share off in our newsletter. And then I guess there was also some more interesting new articles about how I guess AI compares to the T-race from back in the day. So like I said, this is pulling out recent information that's happening in the last 24 hours and putting it in a way that can be synthesized by our viewers and actually, hopefully save us some time while we go off and grow our newsletter and make millions. But that's a wrap for this video, guys. I hope y'all enjoyed this updated CrewAI tutorial where you got to learn how to use the new updated features of CrewAI, and you got to build your own AI newsletter. So if you enjoyed this tutorial, I definitely think you'll love some of the other AI tutorials I have on this channel. And I also recommend checking out whichever video YouTube has recommended for you over here on the side of the screen. But until next time, I can't wait to see you guys and hope you have a great day. See ya.